Okay, thank you. Thank you. It's okay, it's fine. So, a pleasure to be here again. As you were saying, yes, I was here last year. The weather was not like that, so it's even more pleasure. I'm also very happy to see that there are so many people in the room yet, because starting from this morning at 9 with so many presentations, the day was very tough, so thanks for remaining. As they were saying during the introduction, what I would like to try to do in the next around 50 minutes is to give you a little bit of an understanding of what it means to talk about governance for smart cities and why it is important to do that, especially in a conference that is focusing on a specific technology. So why do we need to talk about governance? I'll touch a few points. So I'll start showing some of the things actually that we were discussing today that will be covered. One of the key points that I want to show you is how everything started when we talk about governance. So my research journey, I would say, because it was quite long and extensive, and also to explain you why it is today that we talk about governance and not before, because it's quite weird that we talk about governance after only, the discussion about governance has started growing only after around 15 years that the smart city team really came out. So it's quite late. I will show you what it means, governance of smart city projects. So what do we know about that? And then there will be some insights that are connected to how we suggest managing the governance of smart city projects. So let me start by saying that in the entire presentation, everything that you see is evidence-based. Mainly it comes from the research that we conducted in our lab in Edinburgh, but also in collaboration with many other stakeholders. As they were saying at the beginning, I have been working on this topic for the last around 15 years. And at the very beginning, which was around 2011, you could hear not much about smart cities. It was at the very beginning, everything was very technocentric. There were a few industry reports, not many articles, and a lot of chaos, which is very similar to what we have with digital twins today. A lot of confusion, many terms, things that are overlapping, and a bit of lack of clarity, because it's an emerging field, and it was at that time. And there was absolutely no discussion about government or governance. It was all about technology at the very beginning. So after that, we started developing material, and a few years passed, and around 2015, the team started to change. We had the introduction of a more socio-technical perspective in smart city development. So the connection, not just of technology for the sake of technology, but the connection of technology in cities to support societal change, to support quality of life, and also an initial understanding that it was everything more like a bubble. It was a lot of promises, but not much evidence of what technology could really do in cities, what kind of benefits we can have. Today, the discussion is a bit different, because obviously we know that there are expectations, and on the other side, there are benefits, and there are also unaccounted effects of technology. But the discussion has started moving more towards people, society, processes, not just technology. And that's why we started working on governance, looking at how different actors collaborate, looking at how the fact that it's not just about the government that is working on smart city projects, but there is a network of actors that are collaborating together. And I think that in the last couple of years, that's when we started getting a bit annoyed. And that's why we have this article that Giza was talking about. Basically, we had a very intensive journey, especially in the last 5 years, around governance. Everything started to build up when we worked for the United Nations, UNCTAD in Geneva. UNCTAD is an agency of the United Nations that is specializing in science, technology, and innovation. So we were asked to do, basically every 5 years, they do a report that is looking at how science and technology and innovation is helping to support urban development. And in this case, we started seeing things with many different cases that were exactly as we were discussing this morning. There was a lot of discussion about technology, but then the problem was not technology when we were looking at the projects. The problem was the way in which technology was implemented. And we also saw many instances in which technology was creating more damage than benefits, to the point that it was a time in which in many cities, talking about smart cities was very negative. They didn't even want to hear the term. They were very disappointed, especially municipalities. So there was this kind of change in the expectation. At the beginning, as it happened in innovation, there are high expectations. It becomes everything very promising, very supportive also in terms of the municipalities that were looking into the technology as a way to improve quality of life. The trend started to change. There was a negative attitude. And then we have the United Nations, UN Habitat especially, came out with this program. I don't know if you are familiar with the program. Is one of the flagship program of the UN Habitat. It's on people-centered smart cities. That's why now we talk about international guidelines. These started changing things a bit. And the reason is because municipalities, they were starting to be disappointed, obviously, because they didn't see the results that they were expecting. They were also starting to lose in faith because there was no real clarity around what smart city means. So what happened with this program is that finally we have an international organization like the United Nations that started taking a position around what smart city development should look like. So they developed this program, which started with an idea of helping governments to understand how to manage smart city projects. And we started working with them. And one of the biggest activities that we did, it was in 2023, we finally tried to do a first international mapping of smart city initiatives from the governance perspective. We wanted to understand how cities across the world were managing smart city projects, because this mapping has never been done before. So we talked with 250 municipalities from 5 different countries. Unfortunately, we were not able to cover Australia. So we only had to use secondary data, but we were really absolutely not able to get in contact with anybody there. They didn't want to participate. I don't know why. We collected a lot of data, and I will show you during the presentation also some of the insights that we had from this study. And it's available online if you want to have a look. The same for this one, which is my favorite one for now. This one was published 2 years ago, and it was a follow-up of that project. So with that project, we saw that there was a lot of interest from municipalities, and we also discovered that there were measuring efficiencies in the way in which they were managing governance. So the idea of governance in the eyes of the municipal government was something very different from what we would have expected. Many things were missing. So what we decided to do a follow-up project and to develop a playbook with recommendations for mainly, I mean, we say regional and national governments, but it's mainly for municipalities, so I would say local governments in this case. And we developed a governance framework for what we consider to be people-centered smart cities. So we take the technocentric approach away, and we develop the framework with these recommendations. After that, another key milestone in the international landscape is this report, which is the World Smart City Outlook that we finished last year. It was published in November, I think. And why this report is important? Because finally, last year in June, the UN member states decided that they wanted international guidelines for people-centered smart cities. Actually, before June, I think it was. I think it was the year before. So what happened is that they asked UN Habitat to develop these guidelines. And as part of the development of these guidelines, obviously, we needed evidence. So they wanted evidence-based guidelines. And so they asked for this study. And this study is looking, again, at the development of smart city projects all over the globe. And it provides additional recommendations that build on what we discovered before. So with these 3 steps, we were able to start creating a big body of knowledge around what should be done in order to manage smart city projects and what governance requirements municipal governments should take into account. And everything then has also been included in a book, which will be published soon, because we decided also to have something that was in a different format, and so we decided also to go with a book. Now, when we talk about governance of smart city projects, I'll show you what we discovered in terms of findings, connecting our research to also another body of research that comes from other colleagues all over the world, because in the last 5 years, the governance team has been growing quite a lot. So everything starts with the idea that obviously we want cities to be a better place. But I don't know if any of you is looking at the data that is available even on the UN website on how we are doing with Sustainable Development Goals. And if you look at Sustainable Development Goal 11, in this case, you will see that the situation is not looking that good. So if we are really aiming to have something different in 2030, we are a bit far from getting there. So what happened is that in this landscape, smart city projects came out as a potential solution. This morning, even other colleagues were saying, technology is not always the solution. I cannot agree more. But sometimes it can help. It depends on how we decide to embed that in the urban environment. So with smart city projects, we have a situation in which municipalities start understanding that they can leverage digital technologies to mitigate or solve some of the sustainability issues that are affecting their cities. Now, how does it look like? More or less in this way. So usually there is a local government, which is kind of coordinating things, or it should. That would be like the best case scenario. And then there are many different projects that are happening within the city. But a key point here is that not all these projects are coming from the government. As we were discussing this morning with some of the presentations, there is a lot of bottom-up activity that is also happening. So the city becomes a sort of lab. There are many different projects happening together in parallel. Some of them might even be overlapping, not necessarily there is coordination. But the idea is that there is really a collaborative platform with different actors that are trying to introduce technologies that, in theory, should benefit the city. Now, the problem is that that implies a shift in the way in which we understand service delivery in cities. And that's why we talk about governance. Before, in the years, it was about government. So everything was about the government is providing new services. It's the government responsibility to introduce new technologies and to try to understand how to do that. But this thing is changing. When we talk about smart cities, it is about governance because we go beyond the government. We have very blurring boundaries between the government and the other actors. Who is supposed to do what and how to be accountable for what is done. There are many different institutions that are involved, so we talk about collective action. And as you have seen in the graph before, there are autonomous, but tendentially in general, let's say, coordinated networks of actors. Sometimes they are a bit more coordinated, sometimes they are not. And what is the role of the government in this process? In an ideal situation, it will be the one of the entity that is steering, that is providing support, that is empowering. Now, the problem is that when we look at what is happening, and that's exactly what we discovered with the studies that we did, we see inefficiencies. And with these inefficiencies, the problem is that we started seeing that it was time for research to change, because most of these problems comes with the idea that if you look at the problem, the research is not providing a solution, not yet, in most of the cases. Or the research is not really enough. Or in some cases, the research is not even looking at the problem. So that's why we decided at a certain point, I think it was 1 year ago, to write this manifesto that was published in Nature Cities. It's the article that Giza was mentioning before. So we drafted the manifesto, then I decided to connect with all the other colleagues, and there are, I think, around 20 different organizations, mainly universities that are involved. And we decided to go out with a call for action, because what we have at the moment is that there is a very oversimplified understanding of smart city governance when we talk with municipalities. In many cases, they are not really aware of what they need to do in order to implement certain aspects or components of this governance because they just don't know. And in some cases, we find that key requirements of the governance are there, but when we look into the details, they are not really fit for purpose. So basically, we wanted to, well, a slide is missing, but that's no problem. We started looking into possible configurations. So when we talk about different ways in which the governance is happening, because every city is using a different approach, they are not all the same. Some of them are similar, many of them are very different. Some of them are very top-down, some of them are very bottom-up, some of them are very strict regulatory frameworks, some of them are more agile. So they all have many different approaches. Even if we talk about, for example, regions that are similar, because you would expect different approaches, for example, when we talk about authoritarian governments versus governments that are more democratic. You would expect the landscape to influence these type of approaches. But in certain cases, even in contexts like European context, in which you would expect to find a more homogeneous way of managing smart city governance, we were seeing many different ways of doing that. So the objective became, let's try to understand what could work and what is not working so that we can provide guidelines. I can give you example of inefficiencies. There are, I don't remember the percentages, but for the first time it was really high. There are many cities that are working on smart city projects, but they have absolutely no policy, no regulations on how to implement smart city projects or digital technologies in cities. So basically they're blind. Everyone can do whatever they want. There is absolutely no regulation in place. In other cases, we see that that's a problem that came out this morning. I don't remember which presentation it was, but this one is a major issue, the smart city concept. There are some studies that are quite fascinating if you want to have a look. Smart city projects, sometimes they are called boundary objects. Boundary objects are objects that many different actors can see in different ways, but they are supposed to create cohesion. It's like working on a project. There is a team, and the team is trying to understand how to manage the project. Now, the issue here is that when we have many different actors working together, the fact that for many cities there is no clear understanding of what smart city means, everyone comes with a different understanding, the project is failing. Because they all have different expectations, different understanding, different visions, and it's difficult to find a connection. So not having a clear interpretation that can be used to align the different stakeholders, it's a big problem. And we saw that in many cities. Another issue that, in my point of view, is the biggest one, is the monitoring and assessment element. I would say almost all cities that we work with, they have no assessment tool for smart city projects. Most of them, and I'll discuss that later, they rely on rankings to understand whether they perform well or they are not perform very good. They like to compare themselves with other cities, but rankings are not very effective. And not having an assessment tool that can really demonstrate the impact that technology is having on the city and its residents, it's really a major issue. Critical competencies that are missing in the municipal government, another key issue. Sometimes governments are really trying to do as much as they can, especially in a period in which we know that they are affected by austerity. But in some cases, we saw the municipalities didn't really have, let's say, colleagues that could really help in understanding how to manage the governance because some skills were missing. We talked about data literacy this morning. It could be one of them, but there are also others that are more related to, for example, strategic planning with technology, understanding ethics of technology, impacts of technology. These things were missing. As I was saying, regulatory frameworks that sometimes are not there. And then there is the part related to the residents and the capability to involve them. This is a new area for many municipalities because for many municipalities, residents are a completely new stakeholder in terms of having a direct involvement and active participation. It's not easy. So sometimes there's a problem of having municipalities that are trying to use tools that are not necessarily the best fit when we talk about involving residents. They might help with companies, but not necessarily with other type of stakeholders. So in light of this situation, we did our studies and we started comparing things. We started analyzing all the data that we had and we came out with a set of recommendations. So this is very much connected to the idea of tactical urbanism that you were talking about this morning. Actually, Jamie Lerner, he was the mayor of Curitiba a few years ago, and he was using a similar approach. So the idea with smart cities it's exactly the same. Sometimes you don't need huge interventions. You might need technologies that sometimes are not even the most evolved. They might not even be the cutting-edge technology. They just need to be implemented properly, even at small scale, but they need to work properly, and they can create impact. So sometimes it's not just about major infrastructure projects or the construction of new cities. Even small interventions can make a difference, and we saw that in many cities. Technology, though, it should be an enabler, not a solution, because technology in itself, when it's embedded in the city, if it's not well connected with, for example, sociocultural aspects, it doesn't work. Acceptance, for example, it's a very important element that in most of the cases is not very much accounted for. How are different groups in the city going to deal with technology? Are they all involved? Can they all access the technology? Digital divide is accounted? Sometimes these questions are not taken into account because municipalities are attracted by specific technologies because they become popular. They just want that technology, or sometimes because there are companies that are pushing for them to buy these technologies, but they might not be connected very well with the context. So it is about prioritizing what is working for the city, not what is working in other cities. That's the other issue. What is working in another city does not necessarily work in another one. It's not a mobility situation. You cannot just move the technology and reproduce it as it is. It needs to be integrated. That's why, for example, in our research, we talk a lot about mutual adaptation. It is not just the technology that needs to be used and the people that are using the technologies that need to adapt to the new technology. It's also adapting the technology to the context. Changes might be needed in order to make it work. We saw that this morning. It's exactly what we are seeing. Technology is there. But the problem is that when we were talking with municipalities, in most of the cases, it was just about talking about this part of the iceberg. And the issue that we saw is that they don't see the rest. They don't understand that in order for the technology to work, there are many other hidden factors that are more important than the technology itself. And these factors are here. So this is the governance framework that you saw before. And obviously, technology is a key element. We need technology. Without technology, we don't have smart cities. That's beyond question. We need to have an information architecture. We need to have an infrastructure that is supporting the delivery of different services. So all the tech that we have been talking about today, it's there. Even for digital twins, same situation. This is very understood by municipalities. But these other two components, a bit less. So what municipalities ignore is the fact that we also have a collaborative ecosystem. And this collaborative ecosystem, in order to work, it needs to be managed in a proper way. It's about collaborating with many different actors that are not necessarily public sector organizations. So things can be complicated, like in the case of residents, as I was saying before. And the key pillar, strategy, which includes policies, regulations, different type of institutional arrangements. It can imply changes in the way in which the public sector is set. It might imply introduction also of new entities in the municipality. It implies changes. It's about the institution that is changing in order to support technological development. So these two elements are not always understood or not always visible in the way in which municipalities are approaching smart city governance. When we were conducting studies with UNCTAD, the first report that I show you, I took an example from there because there were a few studies that were talking about exactly this situation. So as you probably know, in the sub-Saharan region, there are obviously many households that don't have electricity. So what happened is that we saw that in many studies, they were trying to understand why off-grid technology, which is a pretty simple technology. I mean, we're talking about solar panels, tiny solar panels that can help to provide energy. They were trying to sell these solar panels, integrate them in the systems, but they weren't really able to do that. So they ignored one thing, that the technology was ready. The technology didn't have any problem. The technology was working. What it wasn't working is the fact that in that specific context, it was much better to go with a pay-as-you-go business model. instead of having the entire technology paid at the very beginning, it was much better to give the technology and go with small installments, and at the end, leave the technology to the households. That system was working. So in this case, at the beginning, it wasn't accounted the affordability issue and the way in which the context was working, and that was affecting the way in which the technology could be diffused. When this thing was understood, the same technology was working. Another issue that we saw is the pilot mentality, and I think that this picture gives you an idea what is happening in many cities. There are some cities that are real collectors when it comes to pilots. They like pilots. Because pilots, in the end, they give you this, I would say, false sense of impact. Pilots are indispensable, but they need to be used for a specific thing, experimentation. And some technologies do need experimentation because they are at early stages of development. But for some cities, smart city development has become collecting pilots after pilot. And the problem is that what happened with these pilots? These pilots, they can last a few years. They can benefit maybe a few groups in the city obviously for a limited time. But then when the money is finished, the pilot is gone together with the technology. And in most of the cases, the benefits are gone. So what happened is that what is missing is, again, a sort of business model understanding of the technology and the fact that pilots need to be scaled up. So, and that needs to happen at the very beginning in terms of understanding, because the investment that you have at the beginning for the pilots, which is a massive investment, if the pilot is really working and showing that the technology has potential, then it means scaling up. That's when we see the impact. Before then, the impact is very limited, if even non-existent. So in order to make sure that this happens, it means that anytime there are smart city project starts, the municipality and all the actors involved are supposed to start talking about business model and long-term sustainability. But even in this case, we haven't seen that happening that much. And there is also a balance between, obviously, what can be done and what cannot be done. And that means understanding how to manage risk, because that's another key problem when we talk about smart city projects. For a company, it is easy to manage risk because a company is there for profit. But for municipal governments, developing a culture for innovation, which also implies risk, it's a bit more complicated because we are talking about public funds. But this is a requirement. So it means try to understand what's the connection between the commercial interest and what there is that the municipality can take, and then the benefits, and balancing these things. Another key problem, one-size-fits-all mentalities. We did a nice study on this in Belgium, in which we were trying to understand how regions were actually, not cities, but regions, regional governments, were working on smart city development and policies for smart city development. So when we talk about one-size-fits-all mentality, it means, as I was saying before, that it is not really true that technologies can work anywhere. Some technologies can be a better fit for some cities. Some technologies are not. And in certain situations, we saw that there are cities that are really trying to get to technologies, but without having a proper understanding of why they're selecting them. If you start talking with them and you start digging deeper, and you try to understand the decision-making that was behind the selection of a specific technology, we couldn't really understand why. So I bring you this example because that was the case during COVID. During COVID, schools gone, all closed. So, and I think that probably almost all of you here were having an impact because if you were teaching, everything moved to online. So with the education moving to online in most of the countries, it became quite clear that obviously we needed digital platforms, but not everywhere. In some cases, like in Nigeria, they decided to use a not that sophisticated technology. They started using radios, and it was working just fine. So sometimes, again, it's not the most advanced technology that is needed. And that's the same case for cities. Sometimes some technologies are just not indispensable. And that leads to another problem, advanced and emerging technology. When we talk about emerging technology, it means a technology that is still in a very early stage of development, and there is a lot of experimentation going on. Now, many cities are attracted by these technologies. They want advanced, expensive, highly experimental technological solutions. Well, sometimes they are not the best fit, because sometimes these technologies might, again, as I was saying before, they might create more damage than benefits, especially when they are experimental, because we don't know if the investment is going to pay off. So in some cases, if there are real problems to fix, it might be better to go with less advanced technologies, more mature technologies that can still even be less sophisticated, and even they can cost less. Here is an example. This comes from UN Habitat, so you might have seen that before, because there was a lot of, there are a lot of publications talking about this approach. So what UN Habitat did, together with the Block by Block Foundation, they took Minecraft. Minecraft is a game. I guess that many of you know the game. So with this game, they started saying, okay, how can you use the game for supporting the planning of public spaces, especially in terms of participation? And that's what happened. Relatively unsophisticated technology, because it's very mature. It's a game. And used in more than 35 countries globally. And what happened is that they were able to have groups that usually are not very much involved in participatory planning for public spaces, and they started working with them. So the technology was very effective. And it was also working everywhere. But again, nothing sophisticated, just a different way to look at participation. Strategic approaches, as we say at the beginning, that's a measure gap. In most of the cases, we saw that cities don't really have a formal, let's call it smart city strategy, or a formal set of institutional formal measures for regulating how smart city development happen within the city. They might lack policies, regulations, standards, and it's a clear problem. So one thing that we always recommend is to have a clear vision, because the vision helps to understand what are the goals, what are the motivations behind the introduction of technologies. So we saw that cities that are performing better, they tend to have a vision. They also have measurable outcomes and specific targets. So what do you want to achieve with technology? Because if you don't know what you want to achieve and in how much time, obviously it becomes a bit difficult to plan. There is no much strategizing behind that. Another key problem that we saw is about local challenges and the prioritization of local challenges. So as I was saying before, in many cases, cities tend to see what others are doing and they want to replicate because they believe that that might be good. But sometimes it's just media pushing for certain technologies, or as I was saying before, even companies pushing for certain technologies. There was a certain period around 2012, everybody were talking about urban operating systems, which were these massive platforms that basically were sold in just one go. And they could basically give you an understanding of what was happening in the city. In reality, what was happening is that there were sensors all over the city with a lot of data collected, but nobody knew how to use the data. So understanding what's the challenges that you are facing as a municipality, it is important to understand what technology can really help to fix your problems. Then there is another key point that many municipalities are under-evaluating. You saw before, there are many projects in a city that can be related to technological development. So we have many smart city projects usually. Now, the thing that a municipality will be expected to do is to try to have an oversight of what is happening. Because without this oversight, there might be many different projects that are just overlapping, and that means a waste of resources. And it also means not having control over what is happening in the city. So we saw that cities that are, again, performing a bit better, they tend to have this entity. And I'll show you a bit more what I mean by that. Because it can take different shapes. We still don't know through research. Actually, research is ongoing at the moment. We still don't know what's the best shape or the size or all the functions that this entity should perform. But we know that when it's there, there are benefits. Policies and regulations, I was saying before. And in this case, I would stress the fact that policies, certain policies are missing. So many municipalities didn't have much around cybersecurity, ethics of technology, digital rights, not much of that. And because they are new fields, obviously they were also struggling to understand what they had to include. And then is the monitoring. As I was saying before, monitoring and evaluation are key elements. If you start embedding new technologies, how do you know how they perform? Without monitoring systems, obviously it's just about, as you saw, having pilots, for example. So they can just show that there are new technologies, but nobody was measuring what the technology was doing. Adaptive governance, that's another key element that is coming out, especially recently. Before it was about understanding how the governance is working, so understand what the key components are. But then we also noticed that it needs to be a dynamic process because even the governance needs to be adaptable. So we need flexibility in the way in which the governance is managed. Because, for example, conditions within the city from a landscape perspective, so technological, social, cultural conditions, they can change over time. Governance needs to adapt. It needs to follow. We have seen situations in which, for many cities, for example, it was much better to start with a very top-down approach because it was necessary to create order. But then, when everything was set, they started becoming a bit more flexible, and they started adopting a more bottom-up approach. And these things are not, obviously, they are difficult to standardize because it really depends on how cities are set up. But we saw that this flexibility is giving something more, is giving more support. Collective action is what we saw before. So boosting collective action is a key recommendation for us. This is a graph that is showing you the collaborative ecosystem in Helsinki. The data was collected in around 2015, if I remember correctly. Now, why I'm showing you this graph? Because if you remember the graph that I showed you at the beginning, here are many different smart city projects. You can see them actually. Sometimes actors are collaborating across different projects, and sometimes projects are just more isolated. But what is keeping everything together are these two components. Now, what are these two components? These two components are the municipality and an agency that is working with the municipality that is like the smart city coordinator. They are really helping with the development of all the projects. Sometimes they are involved directly, sometimes they aren't, but they provide oversight and support. And that means also being able to provide a combination of top-down and bottom-up, because what you see here is exactly the situation that I'm describing now. So the municipality is creating the ecosystem that is supporting the actors, policies, frameworks, regulations, even incentives, because that's also something that can be done in order to support bottom-up action. But they create the infrastructure in which all the actors can thrive. Without the infrastructure, the issue is that actors are disconnected, projects don't communicate with each other, duplicates are made, and resources are wasted. And to enable the coordination, going back to the smart city mediator that I was talking about before, here is an example. In Barcelona, similar to Helsinki, you see that there are many different projects. And in this case, why there is only one dot and dot two? Because Barcelona has decided to use a different approach in which they coordinate, in terms of coordination of the smart city projects. In Barcelona, there is a department which is called Municipal Institute of Information Technology, which is embedded in the municipality. So they work inside the municipality and they provide this coordination. They have different functions that I'll show you in a minute, but they are integrated into the municipality. Whereas in other cases, like Helsinki, and in this case you have Amsterdam, there are more hybrid organizations which are autonomous because they have their own legal identity. And the reason why this happened, which I consider as an evolution compared to option one, based on the studies that we are conducting now and the results that we are having, this option gives you more flexibility in terms of procurement because the entity is still owned by the municipality, but they can apply procurement in a different way, and they can also deal with the projects in a different way. And the cases of Amsterdam and Helsinki are very successful, actually. This one is another example of an inside department. This is New York. And the reason why I'm showing you this one is because obviously New York is a megalopoly. So it's an unbelievable big city. So that means having a lot of smart city projects, but also a lot of need of technology that helps the city to perform better. Because if you imagine a situation in which you have almost 10 million inhabitants in a small island, in this case, services need to work very well. So technology is a key asset from them. And when you look at how this organization, this agency is performing in the municipality, it is actually quite remarkable because they act as a broker in the sense that they try to help other agencies to understand the benefits of technology and the way in which they can embed that in their services. And that's why they offer also support and advice. They also provide structured oversight to all the smart city projects, so they have an understanding of what is happening in the city in terms of smart city projects, so that they can create coordination. And also, they provide services on their own. They create projects. And they are very much involved into policy development. Now, these are some of the functions that I was discussing before. So with these intermediate organizations, there is a situation in which you have an actor that is trying to bridge sectors and stakeholders, creating an orchestration and a good coordination between different actors. They can provide policy guidance. So in the case of New York, for example, the intermediate organization is very much involved into the development of the policy. So that means that the know-how on how to develop policies around ethics of technology, cybersecurity, data privacy, it's embedded into the intermediate organization. They have this knowledge. It's inside. They don't need to go to consultants. They have the capability to provide training, and so they work for capacity building. One of the best initiatives that they have is for open data. At a certain point in New York, the open data policy has been transformed in an open data law. So open data has become a requirement for all different agencies and departments in the municipality. So what happened is that when the law was approved, a key problem came out. The data were not being opened. So there were deadlines, but the different departments couldn't really meet the deadlines. Now, the issue was that they were lazy. No. The issue was that they didn't understand what they had to do. So the solution that they found was to put an open data champion in each single agency. So they trained for each single agency one of their representatives, and then they used these representatives to spread the voice. Now, as you can imagine, the level of capacity building that you can have with these champions increases enormously, to the point that the law became effective and things started to change. So that was a great way of show how training and internal support can really make a difference. Facilitating information and resource flow, another important aspect, is not just about data, but it's also about funding, understanding the cost of technology, even the hidden cost. Sometimes buying a technology from a corporation, it's easier, but it has a lot of lock-in effects. These are experts, they can help. So they were providing support to, they are still providing support to all the different agencies in order they can understand everything around the cost of technology and how to select them. Citizen engagement. As I was saying before, citizen engagement is not so simple. Sometimes municipalities are tempted to use ordinary approaches to citizen engagement, but sometimes they don't work. Most of the cases, they don't work. And that also connects to the idea that citizens need to be always engaged, but that's not the case. Sometimes it's about selecting the right citizens depending on the project. So that's something else that they do. There is monitoring, there is evaluation, there is continuous improvement, because another key point that comes out with smart city projects is learning. Some cities are very good in learning and collecting their learning and understanding how they need to apply lessons from other projects in the next ones. Sometimes, and especially true for pilots, pilots are very good for learning. But in many cases, these things are not happening. And it might be also because there is no organization that is able to collect this evidence and translate it in policy. That's what they do. Managing funding, another key problem, sometimes it's difficult to attract funding because for many cities, there are still grants that are used in order to support these smart city projects. And also they become a real champion for change, because another thing that is really indispensable, and we saw that it's not always happening in municipal governments, is the creation of a culture of innovation. And that's a key requirement, because obviously when we talk about technological innovation, some of the projects are not structured as normal projects that usually are managed through standard procurement. These are projects in which we need more flexibility and understanding that failure can happen. So they are very good also in doing that. And this is the city of New York. Just to give you an idea of how they work, a single organization is working with all the units that you see marked in blue. So they're basically working with almost anyone, any single department and agency in the entire municipal government, in the council. So that means creating coordination. Multi-level governance is another element that it's quite indispensable. So we saw that in many cases there were no effective mechanisms connecting government at different governance at different levels. So having different administrative levels connected in the way in which they manage smart city governance is not always the case. And I bring you a case that we studied 2 years ago because we found a phenomenon that was quite unexpected, and we call it symbolic compliance. What does it mean? Now, that's what happened when you have multi-level governance. Now, the case that we were seeing, we were observing is in China, but to be honest with you, I'm pretty sure that if we look, we will find something in Europe as well. So when you have multi-level governance, there is a national government or a regional government, so someone that is at a higher level compared to the municipal government, that is developing a policy. The policy should empower the local actors. And what happens is that when this policy with its regulations or recommendations comes to the local level, we usually see the coordination across different actors. They activate simultaneously, and they try to comply with the new policy. And when they comply, what happens is that the benefits are spread across all 3 minutes. Oh yeah, okay. I'll go faster. What happens is it's basically a situation in which the benefits are spread across all parties, and it feeds back to the national governments that is supposed to understand whether the policy was effective or not. Now, what happened is that we saw that in certain situations, local actors prefer to prioritize appearance rather than effective outcomes. So that means that, yeah, of course, they know that there is a policy, and they start working on the policy. But in this specific case, for example, the policy was saying that they had to develop an intelligent system for mobility, a huge platform. It was there. And the funny thing is that when we went to collect data, we understood that, yeah, they did the platform because they were asked to, but they didn't know how to use that. So the platform was there, so sophisticated technology, lots of data. They complied with the policy, but it was just a symbolic gesture. They had to do that. So the technology was there, lots of money spent. No one was able to understand how to use the data. It was a waste of resources. So that means that more connection between local level and national level is needed, and that can help to avoid these kind of situations. One last point before I go to the conclusion is that collaboration is context sensitive and dynamic. That's another key point that if you look at the literature on smart cities, doesn't come out that easily. What does it mean? Collaboration, sometimes, in most of the cases, is described as 4-helix model. You have the 4-helix model of collaboration. Lots of literature is telling you that obviously government, civil society, businesses, and research institutes or institutions, they need to work together. Now, this is not always the case. It depends. So it depends on the project. So collaboration needs to be context specific. So some projects are going to ask for this type of configuration. Some other projects don't. Sometimes, for example, the municipality just need to procure a technology that can be sold as a package from a company. It can happen. We don't need to do duplicate. It might be still the most effective solution. In that case, citizens and probably academic organizations don't need to be involved. And another key element is that when you have collaboration, that evolves over time. You cannot have the standard model. If you think about the pilots, that's the perfect example to me. When you have a pilot, the configuration of the actors when you have the pilot process is completely different from the configuration of the actors when you have the scale-up, because you need different skills. So that means understanding that collaboration is not permanent, it's temporary. And that's something else that we try to push for. Ranking, as I was saying before, we would love for municipalities to stop thinking about rankings and work more on measurement systems, because rankings tend to oversimplify governance challenges. They don't really give an evidence-based assessment of how technologies are performing. They just give you a generic index that sometimes is based on indicators that are quite misleading. They are not really measuring what the technology is doing. So measurement systems, they should be changed. Now, going to the conclusion, based on what I show you, I would like to go back to the call that we introduced at the beginning. So given that we talk about research, in this case, what we see is that there is a great disconnect between practice and research. Most of the problems that I described today, in research, we still not much development. We need more. So this is an example. I'm happy to share the slides to give you an idea of what kind of problems we are facing now and the most urgent. We have a huge list in an article. But what we came out with as a possible solution is to try to reform the way in which research on smart city development is managed. So first of all, for sure, we need to stop to have conceptual ambiguity. So it is necessary to really try to find a way to make sure that smart city development and smart city governance are understood in the same way across different contexts. And we need to have shared principles, terminology, and insights that are coming from different disciplines, because that's the other key issue that we are facing in research. When we have different disciplines, if we talk about smart city governance and we talk about that in geography or in urban studies, and then you talk with a computer scientist, I can bet that is going to be very different the way in which the definition is going to be taken, or accepted, or even rejected. Then a key problem is the geographically informed design and experimentation of smart city governance. A lot of discussion in research at the moment is about pilots. We experiment with technology a lot, but we never experiment with what? With governance. So it would be nice to have some situations in which we have pilots of governance solutions so that we can try to understand if they work or not. In some cases, these type of experiments are already happening, because you see with certain technologies that are very much evolved and experimental, like autonomous vehicles, many cities are trying to do some testing, and they have sandboxes, which are areas of the city that are subject to very specific type of regulations that are not affecting the entire city, just that tiny part in which the pilots are happening. Doing that with governance is something that can be beneficial, because we can really try to understand if certain solutions are working or not, and where they work, because they might work in certain contexts and not other. The other key issue is the scalability, because when we have more understanding of governance frameworks that can be adapted in different cities, it would be nice to start identifying ways of integrating them and showing that there is the potential for transfer, policy mobility. Because at the moment, in some situations, we see that there are many studies that are showing, that are discussing the idea of provincializing smart city development and smart city governance, and the fact that we can try to find ways of pathways that are maybe working in some context and might be changed in others so that they can work. Understanding how to do that, we need more research. We need absolutely more research. And the first part is the assessment, because again, as I was saying before, if we keep looking at rankings and just simple rank is to understand whether a city is working well with smart city development or not, we don't go anywhere. Because we don't really understand if the government approaches that they're using are really working or not, and what kind of benefits they are producing, or what kind of impact they are having, and what changes are needed. And they don't trigger a culture for improvement, which is what we need in cities. Because as I was saying, when we talk about smart city development, every city is starting from a different point. And they need to worry what they have. So that means understanding that governance approaches need to be adaptable and flexible, as we saw before. But at the same time, we need to understand when they work and when they don't work. And we need to try to embed lessons around that so that there can be improvement, continuous improvement. That's what we haven't seen in cities so far. I'm pretty sure that in many cases, if we go back to the 250 municipalities that we saw before, in 2 years, not much will change because they don't know what they need to change. Thank you very much.